Chapter 13. Summons.
And I thought going into the Everfree Forest was crazy,
Twilight stressed, letting her horn blink out as she stamped an indignant hoof into the basement's floor. Surely you do not mean to say that you, my own descendant, mean to abandon this pursuit? Sombra asked with a mocking smirk.
No, just... There is a lot wrong with the very foundation of this spell. Just... What?
The alicorn huffed, trotting irritably past her equipment and settling down next to a nearby table with a huff. She lit her magic and picked up a sheet of notes she'd jotted down during the course of Sombra's third and final lesson to determine Twilight's natural aptitude with dark magic. A lesson that, among all the others she'd had, was the one that sent the largest shiver down her spine. Sombra was not blind to her apprehension either, and had been persistently egging his heir onwards for the entire duration. It didn't help that Twilight was still very sore after her close encounter with the rock. After her brush with death the previous day, Twilight had limped back home with a body full of bruises and a mind of pure anxiety. Sombra had been of little help in the latter regard, seemingly content to just let Twilight work it out by herself. The question of her own strength and willingness to do harm, demonstrated by her particularly spirited assault against the giant avian. In the end, Twilight just had to remind herself that she had been justified, and that she would do better to control her own emotions next time to keep herself in line. She could just feel Sombra's smugness from inside her own mind, and it was coming off as something like, "I wouldn't bet on it." She would show that crazy unicorn. Still, when she'd arrived home, Spike had had a near panic attack when he'd seen her state. The young dragon had been just about ready to cart Twilight off to the hospital by the tail before she calmed him down enough to point that he could breathe properly. And then, once more, out came the half-truths and deception. She had told him that she had been on her way to see Zachora in regard to some research she had been doing. However, she'd been attacked by a particularly brave rock on the way there, one which gave her a rough time before she was eventually able to scare it away with her magical prowess. Spike, thankfully, didn't try to dig into the exact details of that magical prowess. The rest of the day after that had been made of copious amounts of bed rest and self-cast healing spells. Considering what it could have been, her injuries were incredibly minor and well within the realms of standard magical healing. She was just glad that there wasn't so much as a fractured bone. The last thing she needed was a prolonged visit to Redheart over at the Ponyville General Hospital. She wasn't sure that the mare had entirely recovered from the migraine that was discovering the princess's new alicorn physiology in her last medical exam. Still, she was practically good as new by the time the morning came. Almost, at least. There was still an irritating ache in basically all of her joints, but that wasn't going to get in the way of her studies. She'd just decided that she would have to work them off. Her anxieties and uncertainty were all pushed to the side at the prospect of yet another new spell come to mind. And they all promptly came rushing back when she found out which highly advanced spell Sombra had in mind. It was the exact same fear spell that Twilight had suffered in the Crystal Empire. The same fear spell that, if Sombra was to be believed, even helped bring about the existence of Nightmare Moon. Of course, Twilight had initially and highly vehemently refused to even consider the possibility of learning such a terrible spell. It was a weapon, an abomination. She wasn't planning on making ponies live out their fears. The very idea was ridiculous. But, as usual, Sombra had gotten to know his protege all too well. He'd again pried into her desire to protect. He pointed out that by learning the mechanics of the spell, that she could do something that he himself had never done. Create a counterspell, a shield. Something that, if cast on a pony before their encounter with the fear spell, could protect them from its effects. As of yet, such a method of protection simply did not exist. Not even Sombra himself apparently could resist his own spell if it was cast, not that he had ever conducted that particular experiment. But if Twilight could find a way to counter the spell, then maybe its dangers could be mitigated for the future. After all, as Sombra had also seen fit to point out, it was highly likely that sometime, someplace, such a spell could be replicated by another dark mage with dark intent. Of course, learning said mechanics was easier said than done. When Sombra had said that this was one of the most complex spells he had ever devised, he was not kidding. For many hours had Twilight been confined to the recesses of the Golden Oak's basement, and in those hours she had barely even started to get her dark magic to work the way she wanted it to. And that time had given her more than a few occasions of returning to her doubts that they should even be playing around with the Senator spell at all. "The reason you fail is because the intent is not there," Sombra chided. "You need to want to make your target feel their fear. You need to feel that power and direct it in full force, not recess into yourself and your own doubts. Truly, such follies might even allow the spell to backfire onto you."
"I'm well aware, and am being very careful,"
Twilight shot back.
"I can get the mechanics with a bit more time, but I just don't want to have that intent. I'm doing this to try and figure out a counter. That's the complete opposite of intent."
"Unless you embrace the spell's capabilities, you will never find that counter," he pointed out. "And as it is, we are not using a living subject." No, thankfully, they were not. Instead, Twilight had been trying to cast a spell on a simple scroll, to create a trap akin to the door which had caught both Spike and herself in the Crystal Empire. Twilight wasn't all that certain she could get the enchantment to last for more than a few minutes, even if she could succeed, but it would at least prove to her distant grandfather that she was capable of it.
"Well, it's not like I have any reason to hate a piece of paper enough to make me want to see its worst fears."
"Then perhaps we require a new tactic," Sombra noted, his ethereal form walking over to the scroll and giving it a thoughtful glance. "If you cannot muster the intent to harm a simple object, then the power of imagination may be of use."
"Imagination?"
Twilight said questioningly as her eyebrow cocked up.
"How so?"
"Let's say you imagine this scroll to be of a pony you truly despise," he began, giving her a predatory grin. "How about that roving stage magician?"
"Trixie? Please, I don't hate—"
"Twilight," Sombra deadpanned. "I can see all within you. Do not forget that." She flinched.
"All right. Okay, sure, I think she's an arrogant, egotistical dropout who really needs a reality check. And yes, I do probably hate her, at least almost as much as she hates me. But that doesn't mean I'd want her to experience her worst fears."
"But it isn't really her. Imagination, Twilight. Tap into your deepest and darkest fantasies, because that is all this will be, a fantasy. There shall be no consequence, and I am sure that the mayor is far from here. But imagine the hypothetical nature I propose. How powerful you would be over your rival, and how she would assuredly never seek to challenge you or endanger your friends again." Twilight bit her lip.
"A fantasy?"
"Just a fantasy. For the moment." But Twilight could not see Sombra's sinister inner thoughts, not like the way he could see hers. And a large part of her was repulsed by the idea of ever doing such a thing to any pony, even Trixie Lulumoon. And yet, a small, spiteful part of her was almost amused by the idea of the high and mighty show pony brought down to such an unrepairable low. No, she shouldn't. It was wrong. And yet, what was the harm in a simple fantasy?
I think...
Twilight! Spike's call broke Twilight out of her deep moral crisis and caught both her and the attention of King Sombra. His apparition remained visible only to Twilight as the dragon burst into the basement alongside the other elements of harmony, all looking quite out of breath.
"Spike? Girls?"
Twilight spoke out in worry at seeing their frazzled state.
"What's wrong? Did something happen? Is there a monster attacking?"
"So, that's not it, not this time," Applejack was the first to say. "I got a message from Princess Celestia," Spike claimed, holding out a scroll in one claw. "I got the girls, but I think we need to get moving to Canterlot."
"And fast. Something pretty big is going on down there."
Rainbow Dash added in.
Like crazy big.
The princess does seem quite concerned,
Rarity noted.
Downright rattled is more like it,
Applejack remarked.
I get the picture. I guess my studies can wait,
Twilight stated. Fluttershy gasped.
Oh, we weren't interrupting anything important, were we? It's fine. Nothing that can't wait. I'm more interested in what has the princess so worried.
It's all right here, Spike said, opening the scroll and reading it once again. She says there's been a break-in at the Canterlot Royal Archives. And just like that, Twilight's heart sank. She shared a glance with a frowning Sombra, though to the others it just looked like she glanced off to one side. Both were clearly considering the possibility that it was their break-in that had been discovered, and if it was, there was going to be a lot of maneuvering to do to cover it up. Whatever the case may be, Sombra began, we shall rectify the situation. Fear not, granddaughter, I'll consider a course of action. Celestia must not suspect my existence, or all will be at stake. Of that, Twilight could not agree more.
Did she say what was taken?
Twilight asked Spike, doing her best to keep herself relatively calm. Not really, he replied with a shake of his head. Only that it was super important, and that Equestria might be in grave danger.
You know, the usual big quest stuff we're called in for,
Rainbow Dash remarked with a smirk.
I say we get the first train over and see if there's a thing we need to shoot with rainbow lasers.
And yet the elements of harmony are in the tree where we left them,
Rarity pointed out. That caused the Pegasus to deflate a little.
Oh, right, I forgot we did that. Come on, girls. We don't need sparkly little gems of Super Saiyan power to defeat any meanies.
Pinkie Pie chirped with a bounce.
We got each other. That's way better than anything else.
Did she at least say which section of the archives was hit?
Twilight continued. Spike shrugged. No, like I said, just that it's bad and now we need to be up there ASAP. Does it matter? Applejack asked. Twilight nodded.
That archive holds a great deal of information, some of it more dangerous than others. Depending on what was taken, well, some of it could be greater trouble than others. It must have been one of the really bad things then,
Fluttershy said with a great amount of worry.
Oh dear, this is already sounding super dangerous.
Now hold on, let's get our what-ifs in check, Applejack interrupted. We don't know a thing about this whole situation yet. We just know that it was important, not that it was dangerous. We should hear what the princess has to say first.
I would endeavor to say that Applejack is correct,
Rarity agreed.
It could simply be a case of the wretched thieves selling a valuable antique for a sum of bits. We simply cannot know for sure.
Then what are we waiting for?
Rainbow asked.
Let's go.
Twilight sighed. She'd only been back for 3 days and already they were heading back to Canterlot.
Well, we won't find out by talking about it here,
Twilight decided.
Come on, girls. Let's go grab some of our things and head straight for the train station. Whatever was taken, we'll fix it and then go home like we always do. Together.
Because if the worst was realized, then she knew that her friends were at her back. No matter what.